Chang is an epic about war, friendship, growing up, and above all, poetry. It's a celebration of all that was great about the Tang Dynasty, an era that is overly romanticized in China, in my humble opinion, but one that left us with a lot of the greatest poetry of all time. Lightchaser Studios went all out with this movie. It's like if Independence Day was made for bookworms, or Forrest Gump was less like We Didn't Start the Fire. This 2023 war and poetry epic follows an important, if slightly obscure, Chinese warrior poet Gao Shi and his friendship with China's most famous poet Li Bai. Along their fictional adventures together, they meet up with the poets Du Fu, Wang Wei, and who knows how many other historic figures. About halfway through, though, my wife said it would be amazing if they did the same thing with French artists and writers back in the 1920s. A bumbling nobody runs into all the famous figures of his era, and that is literally the plot of Woody Allen's Midnight in Paris. The frame story, in which Gao Shi makes an uneasy alliance with an imperial eunuch during a war, may seem like a little bit of a distraction, but it wraps up Gao's life lessons with his erstwhile friend Li quite nicely. Is this movie accurate? Absolutely not. It plays fast and loose, and it has Li Bai and Gao Shi teaching each other wrestling and spear fighting and war strategy. This is a fantasy world, and that shouldn't be surprising if you've seen any of Lightchaser Studios' other fantastic riffs on classical Chinese culture. The title may also be slightly misleading, as the action is divided between Chang'an, today's Xi'an, Yangzhou, Gao's podunk hometown, and the wilds of western Sichuan. Gao Shi and Li Bai bounce back and forth between their home provinces, Gao always walking away in disappointment from his more famous friend, whose irresponsible ways are, honestly, the charm of his poetry.
举杯邀明月，对影成山人。月既不解影，影徒随我身。
If there's one thing I have to say for Lightchaser Studios, it's that their animation is gorgeous. Not flawless, there are occasional shots that seem a little stodgy, and some shots get so photorealistic they throw you out of the movie, but it's all really beautiful. Unlike their earlier 3 films that I reviewed, this movie seems less obsessed with every character being sexy. The rakish Li Bai slumps into a podgy adulthood in a way that seems completely believable, and honestly, if you know him, you would expect. Romance is only vaguely hinted at. A hearty knowledge of Tang Dynasty poetry does help you enjoy this movie, but it's not necessary, and in some ways, a literary background is almost a hindrance. You keep waiting for them to drop night thoughts, which does inevitably happen, or a wave of the hand and I am gone, or why do I live among the green mountains, like you're at a Stones concert, and you know what the encores are going to be. They're going to play Satisfaction, Jagger's going to go woot woo a lot, and it's going to be amazing. But this thing is a mixtape of Chinese poetry, and if that's not already your thing, I hope it inspires some folks to pick up the 300 Tang poems, or a collection of Li Bai or of Du Fu. 48 poems get quoted here, about 1 poem every 4 minutes, which, given the montages and action scenes, that's saying a lot. The movie clocks in at 168 minutes, which probably seems excessive, but it includes a coming-of-age story, 2 lifetimes of experience, a war thriller, and a lot of fantasy, so even at that length, it really doesn't feel too self-important. The movie is a lot to chew on. Some cursory knowledge of the Tang Dynasty, the An Lushan Rebellion, and poems of that era might make it all more fun, but it stands just fine on its own as a historical epic and a quick intro into one of the most important literary eras in human history. Go in with patience, and I hope you'll leave with curiosity. As far as curiosity goes, Chinese poetry is as deep as a well, but not terribly frightening, because most poems are only a few lines long. Ignore your fears of not getting it. Ignore your Chinese friends who will tell you there's no hope of you getting it unless you can read traditional characters. Tang poetry is one of the richest collections of beauty and short phrases ever written. I'm a massive fan of Shakespeare, the metaphysical poets, Prufrock, but I'll tell you, even in English, the 300 Tang poems is one of the best things you can ever read.